that had to earn our salvation. He said that Muslims don't believe in that kind of a God. The answer given was that Catholics don't believe in that kind of a God either, since he didn't have to earn our salvation. He could have just snapped his fingers. But instead, he freely chose to die to demonstrate his unbelievable, immeasurable, immense, unconditional love for us. A sacrificing of one's most precious possession, one's own life, is the ultimate act of love. But Jesus' death was more than just an act of love, but an offering of hope. In Jesus' time, there was a big debate between the Sadducees, who didn't believe in an afterlife, and the Pharisees, who did. And since no one had returned after death to bear witness, the debate raged on. Some argued, why be good if this is all there is? Today's readings address this head-on. The first reading describes the anger of the people of Moses for taking them on a trek into the desert, which resulted in much suffering. Then for their complaining, God has them bitten by serpents. They are saved when God tells Moses to mount a bronze serpent on a pole. Then, like the definition of a sacrament, the people could look at it both as a symbol of God's love to accompany them in their suffering, and a substantive guarantee that they wouldn't die. In today's gospel, Jesus refers to that first reading when he says, just as Moses lifted up the serpent in the desert, so must the Son of Man be lifted up, so that everyone who believes in him may have eternal life. The bronze serpent prophesies Jesus being raised on the cross and resurrected into heaven. Jesus is guaranteeing an afterlife and eternal life. Through the cross, Jesus conquered death for all eternity, so we too, through Jesus, can conquer the death that comes from sin. But we regrettably take note that the suffering part is still there. But why? Jesus doesn't want us to suffer, but why does he allow it? The mystery of suffering is that we can grow spiritually through suffering. When things go well, with much pride, we take credit, but then when they go badly, and they inevitably will, we also have to take the blame. It is when things go badly that we are reminded that we are not in control. At the heart of control is the granddaddy of all sins, pride. It is at the core of all sins. Pride tells us that we are in control and have all the answers. The only antidote to sinful pride is its antithesis, virtuous humility. So Jesus didn't just guarantee an eternal life, but he showed us the way to that eternal life, as described in today's second reading, which says of Jesus, he humbled himself, obedient to death, even death on a cross. The cross was one of those painful and infamous instruments of torture. But by it, Jesus manifested to all humans the magnitude of God's love for the world. And by his personal experience, he gave us full knowledge that he has compassion for our suffering and is with us through it all. That suffering can be necessary for our salvation. Recently, I inadvertently and emotionally hurt a family, for which I apologize. Afterwards, my feelings were classically human, namely deep humiliation. But humiliation brings us to a crossroad where we must make a choice. Do we wallow in humiliation, which shows we are more worried about ourselves and what people will think of us? Or do we convert that humiliation into true humility by focusing on the hurt others experience due to our actions? In short, do we choose love of self or love of others? So how do we apply the lesson of humility in our lives? Confronted by the death of a loved one, do we get stuck too long in the stages of grief, namely denial it happened, anger at God, negotiation to relieve our grief, and guilt for not saving the person? Or do we turn to God in acceptance of our loved one's eternal life and peace? Can we confront the terrible truth that a heart awakened to great love is also open to great pain? After a painful divorce, do we empty ourselves to accept God's will with humility, not pride? When we lose a job and try to get another one, do we recognize God is with us and we will survive by surrendering ultimate control to God? Do we recognize that powerlessness is our greatest treasure, since it is the first step in our surrender to God? The men sitting here in suits just returned from a Acts retreat that Deacon Evans and I were also at. And the theme of the retreat was, he humbled himself. They clean up nicely, don't they? They look much better now than before they left. They normally come in singing, rejoicing with music that reflects the readings of the dead. Let us all learn from their joyful lesson of surrender to God's love through humility.